Good morning. It's good to see you all face to face instead of, imagining that you're there. It's another beautiful Colorado morning. I've grown to really love the snow because where I'm from, there's two seasons. There's pleasant weather and then there's perfect weather. And my wife's a native, and she says if it snows one more time, then we're moving. So I just turned 30 in December, which, woo! And it was a weird experience for me because I pretty much still feel like I'm 18, 19, 20, right? That I still feel young. I feel like at that age when I thought about turning 30, I thought I would have life figured out. I thought I would have things under my control, that I would understand how the world worked and all that, and I certainly don't. And some of you are looking at me like, really, dude, you just turned 30, like you're still a spring chicken, and what a weird thing to be complaining about. But you have to remember, this is the oldest I've ever been, so it's a new experience for me. But I do realize my age sometimes, and I realize that I have gotten older. I've traded in video games for crossword puzzles. My body hurts for no reason sometimes. I have to eat a salad every once in a while. The youths no longer like the music that I listen to. Just a lot of stuff. And last week I got super excited about purchasing nightstands for my bedroom. So just stuff I never thought I'd be where I'm at, I suppose. But I put the nightstands together yesterday, and when you open up a box of furniture, you look at the very top, and you have a little instruction booklet sealed in a nice plastic container. And when you open that up, you're standing at a crossroads. Because there's two types of people, right? There's the directions people, and there's the directions people. Wild guess, I'm the directions person, right? I don't read them. I just dive in, I do it. So that's what I did yesterday. And about an hour into things, when my wife walks in and asks why I'm installing a bidet in the bedroom, I realize I've taken several wrong turns. And I have to find the directions wherever I threw them, pick them up, and set things straight. But what I realized through that is sometimes the right instructions and specific instructions, detailed instructions, are really, really important to get to where you want to go, right? No matter what your personality is, no matter how you relate to people, what you're setting out to do, there's certain cases and instances and events that we go through where the instructions are really important. And I think that that's most evident in God's word when we talk about the nation of Israel and the ancient Israelites in the Old Testament as they maintain their relationship with God, right? And so the first passage we're going to look at today are some instructions. And they're instructions around sacrifices and offerings that the Israelites had to make in order to maintain their relationship with God, right? That God had instituted these things that the Israelites would have to do, that they would have to sacrifice in order to cover up his wrath against their sin and their brokenness so that they could live in relationship with one another. So I invite you to turn with me to the book of Numbers. Preaching out of the book of Numbers, risky to start, the most exciting book in the Bible. Fun fact, the word numbers in Hebrew is bamidbar, so if you ever want to impress the ladies, just ask for their bamidbar. We're going to be in Numbers chapter 28, and we're just going to start in verse 1 and go through verse 8. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the children of Israel and say to them, my offering, my food for my offerings made by fire, as a sweet aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time. And you shall say to them, this is the offering made by fire, which you shall offer to the Lord. 2 male lambs in their first year without blemish, day by day, as a regular burnt offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, the other lamb you shall offer in the evening. And 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, as a grain offering, mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil. It is a regular burnt offering which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. And its drink offering shall be 1/4 of a hin for each lamb. In a holy place you shall pour out the drink to the Lord as an offering. The other lamb you shall offer in the evening, as the morning grain offering and its drink offering. You shall offer it as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord." And so we see very specific instructions, right? And we understand just how in-depth these are. We have the elements of the sacrifice. We have the time that these sacrifices need to be made. We have the exact measurements of what these sacrifices need to contain. And then in other places in the book of Numbers, we have location, right? Well, we have location here. But earlier in the book, it talks about the building of the tabernacle, the holy place where these are made. And we have, it seems like chapters upon chapters talking about how long the tent poles need to be, how far apart they need to be, what fabric the tents need to be made out of, how that complex needs to be built and erected, how it needs to be packed up and carried away. Just an incredible amount of detailed instructions that God is giving through his law to the Israelites. And the reason being is because he wants to maintain that relationship with them, right? And if any of those things go wrong along the way, that relationship between the nation of Israel and God is in jeopardy. And so the instructions are important. And as we look at the elements, they have a face value, right? 2 lambs have a value of just being the lamb. They're the best meat. They're unblemished, right? Just on face value. And we talk about the grain. The grain's being mixed with oil, which is essentially making it into a dough, which is ready to bake. That has value. And the wine has value as well. But there's value beyond it. And a lot of theologians look at that and say, God isn't just institutionalizing a tithe or because he wants those nice things, right? But he's also teaching the Israelites something in that. Because it takes effort to produce all of that every single day. It takes intention and it takes forethought. And so when we look at raising sheep, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, to continually produce these young male sheep that are unblemished within the first year of their lives. That's a hard thing to do. And when we look at the grain, someone's planting a seed at some point, someone's tending that crop, someone's reaping it, someone's harvesting that, someone's milling that down into a fine flour, and someone's mixing it with oil. Like that takes a lot of foresight and a lot of work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And the same with wine. Wine you just don't go to a well and pull out, right? You cultivate the grapes, you cultivate the land, you harvest, you prepare the wine, you age it into a fine wine. So what that's showing us in the book of Numbers and what that's showing us in God's intention in instituting these sacrifices is not just the things he's receiving, but it's the commitment that he's cultivating in the nation of Israel, right? That Israel needs to bring something to the table, not just the things, but something in their heart. That they're intentionally working on these things, producing excellence for God. That it's a committed relationship and a committed covenant. So now we kind of understand why those instructions are so important, why the value of those elements kind of goes past their face value. We're going to look at a passage in the Bible where all those rules were ignored. So, please turn to me to 2 Samuel 23. And what this passage is we find David hiding in a cave, which could be, any number of stories because he hid in a lot of caves, but it doesn't happen in chronological order. This is at the very end of the 2 books of Samuel's, but it's clear that this is happening at some point in David's life before he's king, that it's happening, he's hiding either from Saul or from the Philistines who he's constantly fighting. An important thing to remember as we read this is David is from the village of Bethlehem, right? They call it the city of David in the New Testament. That's where he was born and raised. So we're going to take a peek at this passage. It's 2 Samuel 23. It starts in verse 13. It's 13 to 17. During the harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief warriors came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. "Far be it from me, Lord, to do this," he said. "Is it not the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives?" And David would not drink it. So what rules were followed in the offering of that drink offering? None, right? 0. David was not in a holy place. He was hiding in a cave. It wasn't wine. It was water from a well. He didn't measure it out, it tells us. He wasn't like, "Oh, is that an ephah of well water?" I'm not quite sure, right? He poured it out to God in the moment. Why? If he's a man after God's own heart, why did he ignore the laws and do it his own way? And I like to put myself in David's shoes. Imagine walking out of that cave, looking down on the city of Bethlehem, and seeing your biggest enemy in your hometown, and seeing a well that you used to drink from a little boy being thirsty, and mentioning in passing what I would give to not be hiding in this cave, to be in a time of peace in my hometown, to be able to walk down to my well and get my water. And he can't do it. And so to me, that cry of thirst isn't necessarily the physical need of thirst. It's the state of his soul, that he's been running, that he just wants peace. And those men, and overhearing it, and the text is, it indicates that David's not telling his men to go do this, right? That they're overhearing his need as he's lamenting in a certain way. And so them coming back with the water is a surprise. What we know about David is he knows who God is. He knows God's character. We talked about God calling him a man after his own heart. And so in pouring out that water, he's ignoring rules, he's ignoring regulations to make that offering. And this is important, so I'm going to read it. That the offering, he understands what we talked about, that the offerings weren't just taken on face value. That's not just well water he's pouring out, right? That the lamb, the wine, the grain had meaning behind it. And it had to do with the work that went into creating them. The commitment of the relationship that the nation of Israel had to God. And David's going to take it a step further. Not only was this water bought with the blood of his men, but it's indicative of their sacrificial love for him, right? That they heard something and they were willing to pay with their blood to meet David in his need and his vulnerability. And to David, he's saying, that is a worthy sacrifice because that's who God is. That the meaning of all this sacrifice and offering that he lays out in the book of Numbers isn't to get nice things, right? It isn't to instill commitment in the nation of Israel, that second level of value. He's taking it even one step further, and he's saying God's heart in the midst of wanting this offering and sacrifice is so that he can live in perfect love and relationship with us. That's the desire of God's heart in the midst of all this. That's what God wants. And so when my men love me sacrificially, they go get me something and they bring it to me in a sacrificial relationship. That's reflective of God's character, and that honors who God is. And that is far more valuable, even as well water and what it represents, than the wine of ceremony, right? And David didn't know this, but hundreds of years later, God would come to earth, walk amongst us, sit at a table with some of his best friends at Passover at the Last Supper and say, here's some wine. This is my blood that's going to be poured out for you. David didn't know that God was going to do that, but David knows that God is the kind of God that someday is going to bring his own drink offering, the last drink offering. That after that drink offering is made, no other drink offering will be made because his relationship and his love will be easily accessible by Jew and Gentile, man and woman, rich and poor. No matter who you are, you can come and sit at that table with Jesus. And David said, I may not see that and know that that's going to happen, but I know that that's who God is. And I know that when we reflect that in our personal relationships on this planet, it's poured out as an offering. God takes joy in that. It's worthy of being poured at his feet. It's better than the wine that he demands in ceremony because it reflects his character and it reflects who he is. And he doesn't know it, but when his men bear his vulnerable burden down to the well, get the water, and bring it back to him, it reflects who Christ is in bearing the cross to Calvary and bearing our burdens, right? And that's what I want us to zero in on today. Is we can sit here and say, well, we don't have that kind of ceremony. We don't have the ceremonial wine. Well, we do. The ceremonial wine to me that we carry into this room for us is the fake smiles, right? It's the superficial nature of our interactions when we come to church. It's the checking of the box. It's coming in, doing your thing, leaving, because that's what you've always done. And that's what we've settled into as a larger church body in America, right? And so my challenge today is to leave the wine at the door. Leave it. Because our measure as an authentic, vulnerable community who loves one another well isn't in the ceremonial wine that we bring in, it's in the well water that we produce. That our relationships with one another do more to honor God than anything else. That when we reflect his love, his sacrificial love, That's what he wants. I didn't mention it earlier, but the association with the drink offering in the midst of the burnt offering and the grain offering is actually one of community and joy, right? That you drink wine when you're with the people you love, when you're in celebration, when you're taking joy in something. It's a celebratory thing. And the idea of it is now that you've done the burnt offering and you've done the grain offering, you're going to pour that wine out because you're in communion with God now. You're clean. You can enjoy that wine with God, and he wants to enjoy it with you. That's beautiful, isn't it? And it's the same when we pour that well water of our relationship, when we're loving each other well, God takes joy in it. It's an act of joy. There's a smile on his face when we love each other well. So how do we do that? A couple of weeks ago, Kristen and I were having a bad day. We were trying to make a bigger financial decision together. We just couldn't get on the same page, kind of spinning our wheels with it. And neither of us were in a good spot. We had a dinner date later that night, and we decided to shelve it and just get through that dinner and then get it again. But we left the house just not in good shape. And so in going over to our friend's place to do the dinner, the girls started talking, and my buddy went up to finish some dinner stuff, and I followed him in there. And I realized, I need help. This is a guy who's been in similar situations. I know he's got wisdom for me, but I need to ask him. But still, in knowing that and being convicted in that, it took me like 5 or 6 minutes of just like standing there trying to make awkward small talk, because that's hard. It's hard to ask for help, and it's hard to be vulnerable, even though this is one of my best friends. And I'm so glad I talked to him about it, because he stopped what he was doing. He listened to me, and he gave me really pointed advice from experience, and he invested in me. And it really helped. Like we were able to get through stuff, and I'm really thankful for that. But what it made me realize I was reading this passage is it takes two, right? You have to have two attitudes to cultivate that kind of relationship. One, you have to be willing to help people. You have to be willing to go the distance for people. David's men didn't go down to the creek and get him water. They went down to the well to get him water because that's what he wanted, right? There's a above and beyond there. But even more importantly, and I think it's even harder, because I think all of us in our hearts, like, we want to help people. That's a desire that we have. But the real challenge is the vulnerability, is being on that side of the equation. So don't worry, I'm still the hero of the story, because I did that. So, but that's the challenge, is how do we be vulnerable? And how do we enter into this place and leave that stuff at the door? And wear our needs and wear our brokenness on our sleeve for people to see. That's hard for me. That's really hard. But what I've found is the greatest desire and the greatest need in American Christianity right now, and what people want from the church, is a genuine, authentic community. How many times have you heard that? What people don't realize is it starts with them. It starts on an individual willingness to be vulnerable. To let people see your mess. To let people see your brokenness. That's where it starts. And people are fed up with the church, not because of the way the church is, but because they don't see that they need to start somewhere. That they need to be the ones to start that. I was thinking about illustrations of this, and I thought of waiting at the airport, right? We've all been there. And you've got your boarding pass, you're waiting at the gate. All right, I'm seat C36, sweet, or 36C. I don't know how they do it. But you're sitting there, and right, everyone's just sitting, and you're watching the clock tick close to boarding time, right? And everyone's just waiting for the lady to come up. Now boarding flight, American Flight 117, service to San Francisco. Please welcome our first-class passengers, our business elite, uniformed service members, and any families traveling with small children, right? Everyone's waiting for that so that you can just go, so you can get on the plane. But a funny thing happens. About 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes before boarding time, before anyone even comes to that podium and announces, one person's going to get up and start crowding around the boarding area, right? And what happens? Everyone starts getting up. It's like, oh, that guy, I got to get up there. Like, if he's waiting, like, it must be important, all that sort of thing, right? We're funny creatures because that's what we do. You have a boarding pass that says 36C, that's your seat. No one's sitting in that seat. That's your seat. But you got to get up and you got to stand there because someone else did, right? Unless you're Southwest, because then you got to play kind of blind man's bluff and those things. It's like, I see, I got B46 here. And then you're kind of trying to peek at other people's. Hey, what are you? Right? But the point being, you can help cultivate an authentic, genuine community by being vulnerable yourself and by starting there, because people will follow that. By you being vulnerable, you're telling the community it's okay to be vulnerable. And people will follow that. And the more people that do that, the more genuine, the more authentic a community is going to be. So my challenge this morning is start being vulnerable. Start with you. If you're not satisfied with the relationships in your life, as far as their authenticity and how genuine they are, and you're hungry for more, start with you. Because when you're vulnerable, you give the people in your life permission to be vulnerable. And it's courageous. It's not easy to do. And if you're at a place here today where you don't feel ready to take that step, especially in this community, right, it can be a little bit intimidating. My challenge to you is just start engaging. Because if you walk in and out, there's not even a chance. But start somewhere. Say hi to someone. Don't leave here without making 2 or 3 connections. Even if it's just, hey, I really like your shoes. You might not even really like their shoes. But start somewhere. Engage with people. Talk to people. Get plugged into a small group. Go to Grow Track. See what it looks like to serve here. I'm going to invite the band out because I am closing up. And I'm gonna pray to close us. I know I'm pretty early, but sometimes you say what you got to say, right? So let's be a vulnerable community. And let's love each other in the midst of vulnerability. And let's make it okay to be vulnerable. Because no one's coming in here perfect. The church is the bride of Christ, yes, but it's full of broken people. There's not one person in here that's not broken. And it's not until we give each other permission to show that brokenness that we cultivate authentic, genuine communities. And that's what people want. So if you want that, be willing to sacrifice for it. Be willing to pour out the well water for it. And be willing to show people your heart, your brokenness, and where you're at.